Every now and then, I come across a case that is so strange, I have to wonder how the perpetrator thought he would ever get away with it. This is a story about a man named Camille Cleroux who murdered 2 of his wives, except 20 years went by before friends and family of the victims realized they were dead. When Lisa Roy and Jean Rock mysteriously disappeared, no missing persons reports were ever filed for either of these women. So police weren't looking for them or considered Cléroux as a suspect. He probably would have continued to get away with it if it wasn't for his third and final murder. The victim was his neighbor, who Cléroux thought had no family and would never be missed. But he was wrong, and what began as a missing persons investigation ended with Cléroux going on trial as a serial killer. This is the story of Camille Cleroux. Welcome to Ottawa, Ontario, the capital city of Canada and the political hub of the federal government. Located in southeastern Ontario, Ottawa sits on the border of Gatineau, Quebec. It's about a 4-hour drive away from Toronto and 2 hours away from Montreal. Living in Ottawa was Paula Leclair, a 64-year-old grandmother. She lived in Unit 907 in the Villa Vista high-rise near Walkley and Heron Roads. Before she retired, she worked in a daycare and was known as someone who was good with children. The neighbors who lived on Paula's floor all knew and liked her, and said that she was a loving and kind person who made crafts for the local senior home and grew tomatoes on her balcony. She loved spending time with her grandchild and often offered to help neighbors walk their dogs. And then one day, she mysteriously vanished, and an odd man named Camille Cleroux had moved into her apartment. He would tell Paula's neighbors that she was leaving everything she owned behind and had moved into a new apartment in Hull, Quebec, and also told people that she had won the lottery and left on a trip to Disneyland to spend some of her winnings. Paula had apparently told him that he could have her apartment, and if anyone dared to question him further, he would show them a handwritten letter allegedly written by Paula, claiming she let him have the apartment and asked that Cléroux be left alone. 9 days would go by since Paula had supposedly picked up and moved. And then on May 29, 2010, Cléroux received an unexpected surprise. Paula Leclair's son Andre had become worried when he had not seen or heard from his mother in a while. He tried to call, but no one would answer the phone. So he drove over to her apartment and used a spare key to open the door. At the very worst, he was concerned that his mother was ill, or had maybe hurt herself. But instead, Andre walked into her apartment and found Paula's belongings and furniture missing, and there were boxes everywhere. Camille Cleroux would arrive to the apartment a short time later, and spun the same story he told Paula's neighbors, that his mother had gone on a trip and had left the apartment to Cleroux. He even had enough moxie to ask Andre to give him the spare key. But Andre wasn't having any of Cleroux's nonsense and went straight to the police station to file a missing persons report. Cleroux wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he was well aware he was in serious trouble and wasn't going to hang around Paula's apartment waiting to be arrested. So he went on the run. Kind of. He went into hiding but was still close to the scene of the crime. While police searched for Cléroux, he hid inside his ex-girlfriend's apartment building for 3 nights. A woman named Lisa Barkley dated Cléroux for years, but they would break up after Cléroux was caught seeing another woman. When he suddenly arrived on Lisa's doorstep during the summer of 2010, she hadn't seen or spoken to Cléroux in over 2 years. But Lisa had previously been informed by police that they were looking for Cléroux and wouldn't let him stay. He would leave her apartment, but stayed inside her building, setting up a table with a clock and several pillows, blankets, and boxes in the front lobby. He hid out there for 3 days before the superintendent threatened to call the police if he didn't leave. Shortly afterwards, police would arrest 56-year-old Camille Cleroux. According to investigators, if Cléroux was nervous when they showed up at the apartment to ask him about Paula, he hid it well. He agreed to be interviewed by Detective John Monet and tried his usual manipulation tactics, weaving a web of lies in an attempt to convince police that Paula was on vacation and left him the apartment. But 2 hours into a 14-hour interview, police broke him down, and Cléroux would confess to murdering his neighbor. During the interview, police would learn that Cléroux lived in the same high-rise building as Paula. She lived in Unit 907, and he was in Unit 802. But he liked her apartment more. The unit was larger and had more room for his stuff, and it overlooked Fairley Woods. In his words that he told police, her unit had a better view than his, and he wanted it. At first, he asked Paula to move in with him, to which she refused, so he went to Plan B instead. He decided to kill her. Camille Cleroux had already dug her grave when he invited Paula to go on a walk with him on May 20th, 2010. When she wasn't looking, he pulled out a 6-inch knife he swiped from the restaurant where he worked as a dishwasher and stabbed her in the back before picking up a rock and smashing in her skull. Then he pushed Paula's body into the grave and walked back to her apartment like nothing had ever happened. She hadn't even been dead for an hour, and he was inside her apartment and carrying her stuff to the dumpster behind the building. This would later be confirmed by a few neighbors, who say they saw a man throwing items from Paula's apartment into the building's dumpster out back earlier in the week. And another neighbor would tell police that Cléroux had given him a mountain bike and some window blinds. Homicide detectives would search the dumpsters and found a painting and some Christmas decorations that belonged to the victim. Camille Cleroux targeted Paula because he thought she was all alone in the world and nobody would miss her, which was why he was stunned when her son randomly showed up to check up on her. And then a witness would come forward, and while being interviewed by police, she would admit to writing the forged letter that Cléroux alleged was written by Paula. He had paid her $10 to write the letter, and she only agreed to do it because Cléroux had told her he was unable to read or write. Investigators would spend the next few days searching the wooded area south of Fairley Crescent, near the Walkley train yard. The trail was less than 1 kilometer away from the building where Cléroux and Leclair lived. The media was now aware the human remains had been found in the area, but police at this time wouldn't say whether or not they belonged to Paula. They were waiting for the coroner to confirm identification first. Unlike Paula, Camille Cleroux was not someone who was well liked by people. He was a scrawny little man, approximately 5 foot 2 inches tall, had scruffy white hair, and a heavy French accent. His neighbors would describe him as creepy and a loner, and that he used to walk the wooded trail near Walkley train station to hunt animals. One neighbor would say that she often saw Cléroux pushing a garbage bin to the trails, and that he told her he was doing work for Ontario Hydro. One of his hobbies was collecting old pop bottles and freezers, and he apparently would sell these freezers to other tenants in the building. Laurel Stewart, who lived in the same building as Cléroux on the 8th floor, said that Cléroux was aggressive with women and would knock on her door 3 to 4 times a day, bringing her newspapers, flowers, and wine. She told him over and over that he wasn't her type and she wasn't interested, but he kept pursuing her. Eventually, her son would tell Cléroux to leave her alone. Cléroux's family dynamic was more odd than he was. He was the second oldest of 6 children, but was estranged from most of his family. Cléroux was only speaking to one of his 5 siblings at the time Paula Leclair was murdered, and didn't have much of a relationship with his parents. He and his father hadn't even spoken since 1982. Cléroux also had 5 children of his own, but didn't have much of a relationship with them either. And 3 of his kids had been adopted and raised by 2 of his siblings. As the police were digging into Cléroux's history, as well as interviewing friends, family, and acquaintances, they started to see a familiar pattern. The women in Cléroux's life had a habit of disappearing. Then, about 3 weeks into the investigation, police would announce that Cléroux had been linked to the disappearance of his first wife, Lisa Roy, who hadn't been seen or heard from since 1990, and his second wife, Jean Rock, who disappeared in 2003. Both women lived at a number of addresses over the years in the Ottawa area and were described by police as very day-to-day people, and police believed they were dead since they could find no records of their movements. On July 4th, 1987, Lisa Roy married Camille Cleroux, although when they were interviewed by the Ottawa Citizen, Cleroux's parents said that the couple might not officially have been married. The two lived at 1535 Hetherington Road and had 2 children together. But then Lisa would discover Cleroux's little secret. He had a disturbing attraction to young children. Sometime in April of 1990, Lisa would confront Cleroux, and he would respond by picking up a rock and bashing her to death. She was just 27 years old when he killed her. Then Cleroux would contact the police and tell them that Lisa had assaulted him, and the last time he saw her, she had boarded a bus for Montreal. Police would then issue a warrant for her arrest, which remains outstanding almost to this day. But in reality, it was all just an elaborate ruse Cleroux concocted to cover up her murder. In the middle of the night, Cleroux dismembered her body and wrapped the pieces in butcher paper and buried them in their backyard. The next morning, there was a brand new vegetable garden, specifically tomatoes and cucumbers, measuring 2.5 by 2.5 meters, in Cleroux's backyard. And when interviewed by police, one neighbor would say that they saw Cleroux dragging heavy garbage bags across Hetherington Road towards a wooded area a short time after Lisa Roy disappeared. The neighbor knew Cleroux was eccentric, so they didn't think this was strange at the time, but they would later contact police after Cleroux was arrested for Paula's murder. Jean Rock, the second missing woman, would meet Camille Cleroux in June of 1992 and would have 2 children with him. She was a troubled woman who had some health issues. She was prone to seizures and had a tumultuous relationship with her family. It wasn't unusual for Jean to randomly disappear and to return when her family least expected it. She was in a common-law relationship with Cleroux for 11 years, and it was rocky to say the least. They were constantly breaking up and getting back together. But after 11 years together, Cleroux would snap and admitted to investigators that Jean made him angry one too many times. During the fall of 2003, the two would go for a walk in the woods near Fairley Crescent, where he would pick up a rock and bash her in the head, and then buried her where she fell in a shallow grave. Jean was 32 years old at the time he killed her. Staying true to form, Cleroux would come up with a plan to cover up his crime. He knew a woman with handwriting that resembled Jean Rock's and offered to pay her $10 a letter to write to Rock's family pretending to be Jean. Cleroux would tell this woman what to write, and then he would hand-deliver these letters to Jean's family. In these letters, Jean would claim that she didn't want any direct contact with her family. These fake letters were bad enough, but Cleroux didn't stop there. He would invent a complete fictional life for Rock, making up a story that she fell in love with a trucker named Pierre and had a family with him. Jean's family would receive about 3 forged letters a year, and if it wasn't for Paula being murdered, Cleroux would have most likely gotten away with both the murders of Lisa and Jean. Neither of these women were reported as missing, because other than her children, Lisa didn't have any other surviving family members, and Jean Rock had a pattern of disappearing, so her family assumed she wanted to be left alone. Police would soon learn that the same woman who Cleroux paid to forge letters supposedly written by Paula Leclair had also been paid since 2007 to write letters posing as Jean Rock. The letter writer's identity was never revealed publicly because she was never charged with a crime. Although police did say she had no idea any of these women were deceased. Cleroux told her that Jean wanted nothing to do with her family, but thought they would like to know what she was up to. And to explain Jean's absence, Camille told the letter writer that he kicked her out after he found her in bed with another man. For years, Jean's mother believed that these letters were coming from her daughter, until she heard the news that Camille Cleroux had been arrested for Paula's murder. That's when she contacted police, and told them she hadn't heard from Jean since 2009, which was the last time they received an updated letter from Jean. Jean's family was devastated when they learned that all the letters they received from Jean from 2004 turned out to be fake. Over the years, Cléroux did his best to hide what he did. One acquaintance who knew both Cléroux and Lisa would tell police that Cléroux told her that Lisa had unalived herself and that Jean Rock left him after she became pregnant with another man's child. Shortly after he was arrested, Cléroux would sit down for a 20-minute interview with the Ottawa Citizen, which was foolish considering everything he said could be used against him in court. But perhaps he already knew how he would be pleading at trial. He once again confessed to killing Paula, telling the reporter that he just lost it and that's why he killed her. He also said that he knew where Lisa's body was buried, but he wouldn't tell police, and that he didn't know where Jean Rock's body was located. He described his relationship with Jean as rocky and alleged that she was abusive. Although he said the same thing about Lisa, so take from that what you will. At this point in the investigation, police weren't just dealing with one murder, they were dealing with a potential serial killer, and 8 officers were now assigned to the case. Although the bodies had not been found, police had enough information to believe both women were deceased and were killed in the Ottawa area. And then, about 1 year after Paula was murdered, police were contacted by an Ottawa community housing construction crew doing work at 1535 Hetherington, the same address where Cléroux lived 20 years ago with Lisa Roy. The crew had discovered what they thought were human remains. Police and a forensic archaeologist would conduct a dig at the Hetherington Road housing complex. The focus of their search would be the area where Cléroux planted his spontaneous tomato and cucumber garden in the middle of the night 20 years earlier.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Inspector Mike Callahan with the Ottawa Police. I'm in the Emergency Operations Division and the duty inspector on charge today. The scene is going to be examined. We're going to have a forensic archaeological dig commence shortly to determine what type of evidence we have available. We are making sure that we have the expertise and the proper equipment in place to initiate this examination. And unfortunately, that's all I have at this time. You know what? I'm not able to comment on exactly what transpired yesterday, but I can confirm that there were some remains found here yesterday, and that as a result of that information, we're commencing with a forensic archaeological dig. Very time-consuming task, and to ensure that every bit of forensic evidence is captured during this search, they want to ensure that they have the proper equipment and, as I said, the expertise to make this happen. Well, the coroner has a role whenever remains are found. It's up to the coroner's office to initiate their investigation, which is parallel with ours.
Lucy, the forensics team wrapped up its work here at Camille Cleroux's former home today. They've been digging here for the last 4 days, and I just want to give you a better look at the backyard right now because this is the closest that we've been able to get since the work here started. Police have had this entire area blockaded off, but now you can see exactly where they've been digging. They've been going through here trying to find evidence for the last 4 days, and now you can see that it's all been smoothed over, and I can tell you a little bit about what they found. Police started working here on Monday after human remains were found in the backyard. They found 2 thigh bones, part of a forearm, and numerous finger bones, all wrapped in butcher paper. Police have taken DNA samples from those bones, and they now have DNA samples from the family of Lisa Roy. Roy is one of Cleroux's former wives. She lived with him at this home, and this is where she was last seen before she disappeared. She's never been found, but Cléroux has been charged with her murder.
Cléroux must have realized the jig was up. It was only a matter of time before the remains found in the vegetable garden were linked to one of his missing former partners. In November of 2011, the accused serial killer would lead police to a park on Hetherington Road and told them they would find more remains buried there. Ottawa Police Forensic Identification Unit began another archaeologist dig, not knowing if they would find one or both of the missing women. Police at the time wouldn't confirm if more remains were discovered because they didn't want to jeopardize their investigation. They only would tell reporters that the search of the park was productive. 1 month later, police would announce that the bones from Cléroux's vegetable garden were identified as belonging to Lisa Roy. She was identified the same day the first witness was due to testify about her disappearance at Camille Cleroux's preliminary hearing. However, most of Lisa's remains, including her skull, were never recovered. Police also searched an area of Hetherington Park where a neighbor had seen Cleroux lugging heavy bags. But unfortunately, that area of the park had changed since 1990 and had partly been built over with concrete. Then, in April of 2012, police would conduct a third dig, this time in a heavily wooded area of Walkley train yards, finding more human bones not far from where Paula Leclair's body was buried. Jean Rock's remains would end up being found 5 years before Cléroux killed Paula Leclair, but because she had never been reported as missing, the remains weren't linked to her until police began investigating Cléroux. He had previously buried her remains in Fairley Park, but there were construction crews working near her unmarked grave, and Cléroux got cold feet, so he dug up her remains in 2004 and buried them in another area of the park. But animals would start to dig up the bones. So then, in the summer of 2006, he would place her remains in a purple mesh bag and put them in a shopping cart. At first, he intended to dump the bag at Dow's Lake, but there were too many people there that day. As an alternative, he wheeled the cart to Bronson Avenue, where it crossed the Rideau Canal. He then weighed the bag down with rocks and hurled it into the water. But Cléroux didn't realize how much water was drained from the canal every year before winter. The National Capital Commission staff would later discover the bones in the fall of 2006, after the canal was drained, but the police couldn't figure out who the remains belonged to. There was no missing persons report for Jean Rock. Because of Cléroux's ploy to keep her family believing she was still alive, Camille Cleroux would go on trial in June 2012. Thankfully, he didn't waste anyone's time and would plead guilty to 1 count of first-degree murder for killing Paula Leclair and 2 counts of second-degree murder for the deaths of his former partners. Although prosecutor James Kavanaugh would later say that Cleroux only decided to plead guilty after Lisa Roy's bones were discovered. Jean Rock's family was understandably heartbroken to find out she had been dead for 7 years before learning about her death. When the fake letters were read into evidence, her father, John Rock, would have a seizure and had to be helped out of the courtroom.
Just her good nature, and probably because she was the only person in the building that likely even bothered to give Mr. Cleroux the time of day, that's probably what was her demise in the end.
One day she's there and the next day she's gone, and we believed the lies that he told us.
In court, that fact was too much for her father, seen here leaving the courthouse. He slumped back and said, "I'll kill him." Cleroux looked on without emotion.
He took lies from us, and now we suffer for the rest of our lives. And the father, which is my husband, John Rock, he is suffering from this. He's not very well. He's been sick ever since this happened.
During the sentencing phase, Ontario Superior Court Justice Lynn Ratushne told Cleroux that the best place for him was in prison, and that the public should be comforted knowing that Cleroux will most likely die behind bars. He was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. The media would refer to Cleroux as Ottawa's first known serial killer, but he turned out to be a rare kind because serial killers typically don't target people in their everyday life. Unfortunately, Camille Cleroux would only end up serving 9 years of his life sentence. He would pass away in 2021 of apparent natural causes at the age of 67. Thank you so much for watching and taking the time to hang out with me today. If you enjoyed learning about this case, please be sure to like and subscribe. If there's a case you would like me to cover in a future video, let me know in the comment section down below. If you would like to support my channel, you can go to Buy Me a Coffee if you would like to donate. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.